They call it invasion. There's a picture of it invading, I guess. This is the endometrium of the uterus. And here's our little blastula, or blastocyst. And there's our little inner cell mass. And you can see the structures indicating that it's implanting. Great picture of another blastula here. Okay. So, it says here that there's little enzymes that the trophoblast has that actually help it sort of wedge itself into the endometrium. So that's kind of cool. And another hormone shows up right about then, and it is HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. And that hormone is actually telling the corpus luteum, hey, can you stick around because I'm going to need your estrogen and progesterone to maintain the endometrium of the uterus so that there isn't a miscarriage or a shedding that will happen, and therefore a loss of the pregnancy. So in order to keep that endometrium of the uterus there and able to be providing that oxygen source and nutrient source, HCG from the little embryo, here's our uterus, HCG from that little embryo is a hormone that will go to the corpus luteum that's in the ovary and tells it to keep making estrogen and, well, especially progesterone to maintain the lining of the uterus. And this is an interesting thing because it's really something that happens a lot in the first maybe 1/3 of the pregnancy. And the reason it doesn't have to go on for all of the pregnancy, the HCG levels being high, is that eventually this placenta that forms, that's a connection area between the little baby and the uterus. It's an area where the gas and nutrient exchange will happen. That placenta will, when it's big enough, also make estrogen and progesterone. So those levels are going to stay high for the duration of pregnancy. Originally, they're going to still be made from the corpus luteum. And later, when the placenta is big enough, the placenta will be the one that makes estrogen and progesterone. The interesting thing about HCG as well is because this little blastula is making that hormone to begin with, it is what we can detect in a pregnancy test. So high levels in the first even month of pregnancy are sufficient enough to get a positive reading on a pregnancy test, and it's HCG that we're testing. This picture shows you that HCG is this pink one, and it is really high in it says here first maybe 20 weeks, and so it does kind of stay low after that, because you can see that the estrogen and progesterone is staying high, particularly progesterone, even without HCG being high, because this is where the placenta is big enough that it is also going to be a hormone producer, and it will make this estrogen and progesterone by itself. So right now, when the HCG is high, it's telling the corpus luteum to make it, and the corpus luteum will stay around for 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 months, mostly first maybe 3 or 4 months, and it will make those hormones, but after that the placenta makes them. The whole purpose is for the endometrium to stay very vascular, which is full of blood vessels. Okay, same idea as my other graph. So we're going to move on to looking at the gastrula stage. And the gastrula stage, we had the morula stage, the ball of cells, the blastula stage, the implanted stage of the embryo. And now we're on number 3, the gastrula stage. And the gastrula stage, I think of the letter G making me think of 3 germ layers. And germ comes from the word germination, and that means like to start growing. And the gastrula stage is where we start seeing 3 germ layers forming, and these are the 3 germ layers right here: the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And they've got them here in blue, red, and yellow. And you can see from 7 days to 16 days how it's you can see those layers forming some structures of the body. And to make it really simple, the ectoderm is the one that's going to actually be like, I usually take a piece of white paper and I make like a circle out of that white paper, connect the 2 ends, and like make like a tube out of that paper, and just show you that what happens is the ectoderm, the outer layer, forms the skin and forms the brain and spinal cord, the outer structures. The mesoderm is that middle section that will be the muscles, bones, and blood. And the endoderm is all the tubes, will form all the tubes of the body. And when we think of tubes, that was very obviously the digestive tract, but also the respiratory tract and the urinary tract. Any tubes in the body, those will come from the endoderm. So if we look at this picture, I had a guest speaker that one time, a doctor who actually took 2 balloons and pushed them together and said, this little disc in the center, this embryonic disc, that will be all of your body structures in that disc. And if you're looking at the yellow one, that one is going to end up being the tubes. The one in the middle, the mesoderm, will end up being the muscles and bones and blood. And the outer one, the blue one, will end up being folding around and being the skin and even the spinal cord and brain, because it dips in one spot. So when it dips in, it's like taking a sheet of paper and pushing your hands together till it dips in one spot, and imagining that to be the spinal cord running up and down your little embryo. So if you look at this picture here, seeing that little groove in the embryo, that's like taking a piece of paper, moving your hands together, and it folds in at that spot. And where it folds in and joins, that will make a little tube that's the spinal cord. So gastrulation is when you end up with the 3 germ layers. And those will end up being different body parts. And morphogenesis is when you see the distinct structures start forming. So this slide is going through what the ectoderm will become. But basically, the skin and nervous system are the 2 that you really, really have to know. And so I wrote ecto here just because ecto is this photo. But in the diagram here, ecto is actually the blue part. So meso, muscles, bone, blood, would be this picture here. And then endoderm, all the respiratory tract, digestive tract, urinary, that would be this photo here, and it would still be the very inside part, the tubes of the embryo. Okay? Neurula stage, that's our 4th and final stage of embryonic development. And the neurula is that folding in. And so you can see here, if I said if this was like a sheet of paper and you fold it in until you see a tube forming, that tube would end up being your neural tube, which is your spinal cord. And the rest of it just is your skin that's all around the body. So you can see with neurulation, this little tube forms. Interestingly, when the neurulation happens and that little tube forms, it pinches and joins in the center of it. and it's like a zipper that starts in the center of a zipper of a jacket and then starts zipping towards the tailbone and zipping towards the brain end. So it joins in the center and then starts zipping towards those ends and closing up. Now, you can see that closing up here as the embryo is forming. If you've ever heard of anencephalic or spina bifida, those are conditions where the joining of that neural tube doesn't quite finish. Something has interrupted. So spina bifida would be when the tailbone end is not joined completely, so cerebral spinal fluid can leak out. Paralysis can happen from that spot down. Sometimes those patients would need a shunt to drain fluid from the brain or the spinal cord, but that is what the condition derives from, is a incomplete development at the neurula stage. And you can see that it's around 23 days into the pregnancy when this starting to happen, and that would be when something was interfering with proper fetal development in order for that spina bifida to occur. One thing that they feel is a link is having sufficient folic acid levels, and one thing that can deplete a female of folic acid is long stretches of birth control. And so when someone is going to go off birth control and plan to have a pregnancy, having really good folic acid levels and multivitamins is so essential, because there are some vitamins, and even during having being on birth control, important to take multivitamins, because there are some things that taking medication like that, like a birth control pill, can deplete you of. So having proper folic acid levels important for, well, probably male and female, because sperm health is also important. And sometimes we consider the female egg to be so important and forget that the sperm also has to be in good health. And that's kind of a comment on if a female is not, let's say, drinking alcohol, being careful about her health and diet while she knows eggs are forming because she intends to be pregnant. That's the stretch of time when it's also important for the male to be caring about sperm development as well. There's a nice neurulation photo of the folding in, and you can see joining of the neural tube right in the center until it seals up at the brain end and tailbone end. We see these little spots here, evidence of the vertebrae and muscles developing. We can see how it's sort of taking shape of a little person. Interestingly, it's here where some scientists say that the embryo has gill slits, which makes it in some way related, ancestrally related to underwater creatures. And as that's been investigated more, we realize that those are actual neck folds on the embryo. So that's just an interesting thing. And here's my little review of my baby Goodnight, morula, the ball of cells, blastula, the implanted hollow ball that makes HCG, the gastrula, the forms of 3 germ layers, and the neurula, where the neural tube is forming. So the last little bit here, looking at what happens in some real specific things. You are not going to have to know all these details about when different organs form, but it's just a look at how lungs and kidneys are kind of early on, and then the face starts forming, and then the skeleton and eyes, and they say by 8 weeks all body parts are there. So that little embryo is now going to be called a fetus. 90% of every organ that it will have is when it's born is already established. It says it's a mass of a paper clip, really, really tiny, but has completely everything, so we'll call it a fetus after 8 weeks. And you don't have to know about the Carnegie stages, but those are really significant changes in fetal development that are sometimes described by a doctor. And looking at heartbeat, 9 weeks to 16 weeks, fine hair grows on the baby, and for 20 to 40 weeks, it is basically just getting bigger. Nothing even else significant is left to develop. Awesome links in the PowerPoint. You guys should watch those. Lots of cool animations that I've included in the PowerPoint. I'm going to finish this video right now, and we will talk about the extraembryonic membranes in our next video. Bye for now.